Hi everyone, we're going nice and loose today. I've got some parrot frilly tulips that I've taken a photo of in the garden. I'm going to have a go at trying to do the frilliness. Draw it out really quite simply. It's hard because it's frilly to define where every single petal is. So I've started with guide marks. So I've got my little ovals and then a circle here for the bigger one. And then I've come in and looked at getting the shape. So I just want a rough idea of the shape, each of those placed in. They can be close together, it doesn't matter. I've gone a little bit closer here. And then just a few leaves and a few stems, get those in. So keep it nice and loose. Colours wise, I've got Gamboge yellow, permanent rose, sap green, cobalt blue, and then dioxazine purple, Windsor purple. It all depends what it says on the packet, but it's some sort of dark purple colour. You could make it with cobalt blue and permanent rose if you haven't got a purple. All of those are the same consistency, they've all got water in. Okay, I have actually got some to request some powder that I'm going to sprinkle on today. If you haven't got this, it doesn't matter, it's not an essential item. I've also got some salt to hand, though I'm not quite sure if I'm going to use it yet or if I'm just going to use water. So let's get on with some water to start with. What I'm doing is I'm wetting everywhere on the paper apart from the tulip heads that I'm going to leave dry. If you go over them a little bit, don't worry. We're going loose today. We're just going to try and get that lovely frilly effect. Maybe with a bit of salt. And then maybe with a bit of water pushing out to create watermarks where you want them. So it's a bit experimental today. Checking I've got most places. Okay, so I'm going to come on with some Gamboge yellow first. And I'm concentrating on hitting the leaves and stems. I don't mind if it flows out, so don't panic. In fact, I will take it out a little bit anyway. Then into some sap green. So we want a really good base on these. Definition comes later, this is just a base. Not that we're going to have much definition because we're going quite loose today. Then I'm dipping into some cobalt blue. You need to work fairly quickly because whether we're putting salt on or whether we're doing this with water, what we don't want is dry edges. That will become apparent in a minute. You know, I like to experiment, and sometimes my experiments don't quite go how I want them to, but that's how we learn. So I'm being quite loose about this, coming in and round quite quickly. I'm going to come into my violet colour and I'm just dabbing this into the blue background. So I want to get this in randomly and just let it spread. So I've got this nice mix. I'm not too concerned about what it's doing. You can get darker places in. Bit of definition here and there. I'm just looking at the bottom edges now and just checking that I've got that little bit of definition if I need it. Okay, so nice clean brush full of water, and we're going to try to create this frill. So the first thing I'm going to do is touch with a bit of water. What's that's going to do is push out a little bit. Where it's drier, it'll push out much more. So I'm just experimenting where I'm going with this. I might have to give it a minute or two if it doesn't start to look like it's pushing out. It is in bits. I don't know whether you'll see it on the picture though. To create that sort of frilliness. It probably will where the greens hit, because that's so basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a loaded brush and touching the edge of the paint, wetting further than it needs to go. Now I want to do this mainly on the tops of the tulips. And it should start to push. If it bleeds in this way, I don't want you to worry about that. That's all going to add to shadow. We're getting it to push out the other way, so we're actually intentionally creating watermarks, and those watermarks are going to form the edge of these parrot tulips. So it is working, it's working, whether you can see it on the camera, I think just about. You just got to keep going, keep adding and watching. It will start to do it. It's done it very well there. It needs to be the right wetness to do it. It needs to be nearly dry. If at this point you're thinking, oh, this is too hard, it's not working, then get a sprinkle of salt. We're going to tackle it twofold here, and we're going to try and put some salt where we've wet, so just along that edge. So you're going to be very precise as to where you're putting that salt. So we're tackling in twofold now. If the water doesn't work that way, the salt will suck it up and you'll get a frilly edge that way. And then I've also got this sprinkle of the gold powder. So this reminds me very much of eyeshadow. You get bronze, you get gold, and you get copper. And if you sprinkle it into wet paint, it settles with a little glisten. So it's really nice for sort of floral backgrounds. It's called Aqua Bronze. And it's by Schminke. You can mix it with a little bit of water as well, and it makes nice golds. So you can see it's quite potent. It would make good eyeshadow. So just keep watching. Now I might sprinkle a little bit more salt on in a minute, but you're watching as it's drying, and I might put a little bit more water on. Some of these bits that are a bit muckier, you can just dab that off now on the centre of your flowers, because it is just water really, and that will just stop it going any further. Okay, I'm just going to let that dry and I'll come back to you after. Okay, so that's dried nicely now. What you need to do is very carefully rub off the salt that's on the flowers. Don't rub everywhere else, especially if you've used the bronzing powder, because that will smear. So just carefully rub the salt off and blow that off. The other thing that you can do at this point when you're nice and dry is to get a damp brush, and if there's any bits on the flowers that you think are a bit too strong for shadow, then you can dab that off as well. I think it's created quite a nice effect on here. I think it will definitely make it look like the frilly type of tulips. This bit here has worked wonderfully. I'm really pleased with that bit. Okay, so what I want to do now is to come into the leaves and stems just a little bit more before we move on, just to identify a few areas in the background to pull the frilliness out a little bit more. So we'll start by just coming onto the stems. So I'm still using my round number 10. I've got a little bit of water. I'm just going to bring in some sap green. Don't be afraid to turn around to make it easier for you to get to the bit of the picture that you need to get to. I just want to get a nice edge as I'm coming down on this stem. And it's always easier if you can see the tip of the brush like that. And then I'm going to come in and do this one. This one's a lot smaller, so I don't need extra water on that. And this one, again, twizzling round. You want a little bit of shadow on those. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of Cobalt Blue on a number 6 and just pop it down one side. So just choose a side and just work with it. This one's dried off a little bit, so I'm just going to pop that one back in. So this one, because it's slanted, the shadow will come underneath. It's slanted quite a lot. Put a bit of shadow underneath that one as well. Each of these is cut off into a leaf. So a little sort of damp brush like that would just be enough. I'm going to dry that off and then I'll come into the leaves. Okay, so that's dried and I can work into the leaves now. So if I use my round number 10 to bring in a little bit of water and my round number 6 to pop in a little bit of colour. So I'm just going to pull out a few. It's a really nice opportunity for you to have a little go at negative painting again, because by painting some of these leaves in, you should be able to identify some shapes that would class as lighter leaves. So that's a little bit of the sap green and a little bit of the cobalt blue. And then just pull this so I can see what I'm referencing here. So if I come this side, a little bit of sap green in here. And a little bit of cobalt blue. So you can make them up a little bit, just follow what you've got appearing really. So here now I've got the shape of a leaf that's appeared without me having to do anything. So that's making a leaf from the background colours, negative painting. I'm going to come in and just define this one next. So with this one, we don't want to lose the frilliness. In fact, if we can, we want to create a little bit more frilliness. So what I've done is I've stopped short of where the water ends. So I've got water still appearing here. The water goes to there, but I've stopped so that I'm getting that soft frilly edge. I'm just going to watch that. I'm going to come back to it in a second. Okay, if I bring one in here, so this is all just sap green and cobalt blue, and it's just picking out where you want your positive leaves to be and where you want your negative leaves to be. You can just have a few of each. It doesn't necessarily have to come off the end of the paper. You can do that just to soften it in. What I'm going to do with this one as well, because I want to keep this, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of sap green and I'm going to run it this way. So in effect I'm outlining that leaf. Then with a damp brush I'm just touching that in. So what I'm getting is that shadowed effect of that leaf overlapping but not having to do much in the background. Whilst I'm doing this, I'm still watching this up here. And in fact, what I'm going to do now is just add a little bit more water. If I can make it look frillier, all the better. I'm going to come in and do this leaf now. Very similar, because I want that frilly edge at the top. So I'm going to stop short. So that I don't lose that fluffiness. If you do lose that fluffiness, don't panic. So use a bit more salt and it'll come back. This is a bit of cobalt blue coming in. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is increase the fluffiness of the other edges. You've got to be fairly careful about what you're doing, because you don't want to disrupt all of the bronzing powder. So I'm going to basically just create, so this is just cobalt blue, and you can just work in little sections. So I'm popping it on with my round number 6. This is just water that I'm flooding into it now, just to create a little bit more fluffiness. I'm touching places and not touching other places. It'll make sense. Then I'm going to come this way and run some water. So I am slanted because I want the water to run away. So I'm touching again, touching all of the edges on this side. So into here, I can run a little bit more water now. Slanting just means it's going to flow through and out that way and help to define the fluffiness. Just make sure you're just picking with a brush any of those little bits up, and don't move over your bronzing powder, or else it'll just lift that all up. So carry on and do a little bit more here. You can build this up gradually. A little bit of water. If you're slanting, then it's definitely not going to run into your flower. You run away from your flower. Okay, I'm just going to dry that bit off and then I'll come on to the next one. Okay, so we're going to have a go again. And come this side and turn upside down. So put the colour on with my number 6. Wet brush. And touch into each of those. So I'm loading the brush and then I'm going to come underneath. And you'll see that it pulls that colour. It gives that really nice fluffy edge. Then I can do the same on these ones. Just try to make sure that they look quite random. You don't want a row of dots that are all the same size and shape. And then touch in. So this is loaded brush, loaded with water. And then come underneath. And you touch in the edges and you'll pull it back. You can at any point use the purple as well if you want to. Just keep avoiding that bronzing powder. If there's any bits that look a bit too dark on the top, then you can just come back in with those with a bit more water and it'll just push that back out again. Obviously you can do this with the green as well, so if we take a little bit of green and just dot this in here, so if your green hasn't worked that well or you want to add more, you can do it that way too. So if I just touch in with some water and then underneath. It's all about the angle and running it. And I can do similar here, just to bring that out a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off and then we'll come on to the flowers. Okay, so these are nice and dry now. Now this bit now you're going to need to work on dry. So normally when we do flowers we do wet in wet for each petal and then let it dry. Because we want to make it look fluffy, what I want you to look at is where the frilly bits are, and we're going to come in and drop water in. So if I come into here now, I'll show you what I mean. So this is just rose, on a brush, and then this is full of water, and what I'm going to do is drop in. I might need to give it a minute to make sure. Let's come and do another one somewhere else. If we do this section here, look, so it's going to show you that actually you don't need to be as quick as you think you need to be, because it's still quite wet and you need the sheen to start to go off before you can put the frilly bits in. And then I'm going to come into this one here. So you're intentionally creating watermarks. So let's see if I can get this to do it. To create that frilliness. I'm going to put a watermark in the middle there. And then I want the frilliness around the edge. So this is working perfectly. So you've got to time it right. That one at the top's not quite timed right, or it's not quite dry because it's going into the background a little bit as well. But you can see how that's working, and that frilliness is now working. That's worked really nicely as well. Check these are dry. So if I come in here, this is a good one, next one to do, I think. So you're creating the frilly effect, and then whilst you're doing this, I just want you to have a little look, and if you see any darker areas, because we can add a bit of shadow whilst it's damp, then I just want you to add a little bit of the purple in. Because we want this to be quite loose, I don't want us to overwork it. So this is an opportunity for us to add a little bit as we go. Actually looks like there's a little bit of yellow in here as well, so it might be nice to add a little bit in there whilst we can. So we're just going to work petal by petal. I'm going to dry those off and then come in again. Okay, so we're going to carry on with creating this frilliness. So we're going to come in on this one. And do this one as a whole on this side. This point. I'm just going to pick up some shadow colour, just drop that in now. Any bits that are stronger, just trying to time it that I get the watermark in at the right point. I feel very conscious that I'm videoing, so I need to move quickly, but I need it to actually do the watermark at the right point. To create that frilliness. So I'm just loading the water in. This one's still too wet, it's not taking it as well. It's all about patience, as I'm finding out. Come in and do this one at the back here, and I'll do this edge one here as well. The lighter the colour, the more delicate the effect. The darker the colour, the more intense the effect. But it's just waiting that the sheen's starting to go off, and then you come in. Trouble is with some of these, I'm a little bit too wet. So I'm just dropping it in at the top here, just to soften in that edge. Just going to take some water out there. Actually, when you want to make watermarks, it's a lot harder than you think. Is this at the point now I can try and add a few more? No, it's still too wet. So you've got plenty of time. I'll do a couple more this side. I'll take a bit of stronger rose in here. A little bit in there as well. So it's just a case of just keep watching and adding bits of water. It will eventually do it. And you will get that nice ruffle effect. So I'm going to carry on. I'll come back to you when I've done these. Okay, so these are all still wet. I've popped bits of water on and I'm just waiting and waiting. Because you don't really want to have them to have too many defined edges, it's a case of working in for these centres. So I'm just using a little bit of rose, and it's quite a lot of light. So I've taken in a few marks here, and then I'm just going to touch in with a bit of water just to fill that in. If I make a few more watermarks as I'm going, even better. If these aren't quite dry, we want that to happen. What you might find as you're doing this is as it dries you see more and more watermarks. What tends to happen is the wetter areas create the watermarks as it all dries. So don't panic if you're doing it and thinking, I can't see any watermarks, because they will appear. If you've got wetter areas, they will appear. So if I sort of come into here now, just start to create these lighter shapes, and then there's quite a lot of light in here. So if you just use rose and then water just to connect through, you don't have to hit everywhere. Leave white spaces and load your brush so that it runs. If it runs, it's creating a watermark. You can see that. So there's lots of dry spaces within those. I've got this one still to do. So this one's a bit darker. I'm using my number 6 for all of this. I'm going to add a bit of rose and a bit of purple just to darken that a bit. In fact, I'm going to bring a bit of purple into this. So this, we're basically breaking all the rules. This is still wet and I'm taking purple in, but it's a stage that it's wet that it's going to watermark. So I know by adding that bit of shadow there, I'm going to create a frilly watermark edge. So I want you to just be thinking about things like that. That watermark is what we want. And then I'm going to add plenty of water. So just keep dabbing it in. I'm going to dab along this edge. Just connect that a little bit, dabbing. And then just watch and just keep adding. You can add watery paint, you can add watery, just water if you want. So all of this is still really quite wet. So I'm going to add a little bit of purple where there might be a little bit of shadow. It's actually a lot harder than you think to create watermarks. I think that's what I've established today. It Just using a little bit of this watered down purple to create shadow and to try to create an odd watermark here and there. Right, now I've just got water, so I can just add a bit more water in places. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. I think I'm about there. Okay, I think I'm about there really. I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. It's surprisingly quite hard to make watermarks when you want to make them, but I've got some really nice frilly effects. You could, if you wanted to at this stage, come back in and do a little bit more and add more watermarks if you haven't got as many as you want. Okay, hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week.